Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending from where you're joining us today. And welcome to this virtual event on employee collaboration in times of crisis. Joining us here today is Tom de Rijk, next-gen research expert, who will share his take on digital employee collaboration. We also have Philip de Boek joining us, innovation expert, sharing his experience on digital workshopping, as well as some tips and tricks for your digital collaboration challenges. If you have any questions during this session, please use the question pane, which you can find at the right-hand side of your screen. We will pick them up after the session. Without further ado, I would like to give the mic to Tom.
Hi. I think in the last couple of weeks, we all participated in one big experiment. We participated in an experiment that was forcing us to all start to work from home. Literally, our homes became our workspace. And although this is not really new because some of us already did this before from time to time, and we also know the concept of digital nomads, people working from wherever in the world remotely. The scale at which we started doing it is totally new. All of a sudden, we all have to do it, and it's the only option we have. And you can clearly see that change in behavior and the change in habits in the statistics of companies like Zoom, but also if we look at products like Teams from Microsoft, we see a huge impact. Looking at what we see here, statistics from Teams, we see that the number of minutes we spent in virtual meetings has just tripled. And we also see that we put on the camera 10 times more. So it's clear that virtual meetings have become the new normal, and it's normal to start to work together while we are apart from each other. So I think that was the easy bit. It was rather easy to turn that virtual meeting or that physical meeting into a virtual one. But what about workshopping? What about brainstorming sessions? How can we do that? That's the real question, I think. How can we also turn our homes into a workshop space? In order to investigate that, I want you to take you through the kind of characteristics of true digital collaboration, because that's what we need to do. We need to move from just meeting in virtual spaces to truly collaborating by using digital. So what are the 5 characteristics of true digital collaboration? Well, first of all, in the digital space, we can work together with more people and we can make use of the collective intelligence of a bigger group. Secondly, it's boundless in time and space. People can participate from anywhere and anytime. Especially when we take into account the use of mobile devices, there are no boundaries from where and when we collaborate with one another. And then we have consecutive and iterative learning. We're going to work together with each other, not just during an hour, during half a day maybe. No, we can do that over the course of days, weeks, and months. And while we go forward, we can start to add things to the project will grow, and we build up new learnings. A fourth characteristic of true digital collaboration is the fact that we can mix different modes of working together. We can work in a synchronous way, which means that we are all there and we literally work together in the moment, or we can do that in asynchronous ways, which means that we work on a certain project or we add things to a certain project on an individual basis, not necessarily when the others are there as well. And then the final characteristic of true digital collaboration is that we have that one space, that one place where we can store all the information, where we can archive, but also where we can curate together. One virtual working space. So if we look at these 5 characteristics of digital collaboration, I think it becomes clear that from a technology perspective, we need more than our Zoom calls and our team meetings. We need more than just virtual meeting software. We need to add a piece of technology that will allow us to create that virtual workspace. Already a couple of years ago at Insights Consulting, we created our Insight Activation Studio, which is exactly that. It's a virtual workspace where we can work together over a longer period of time with a large group of our fellow employees and colleagues. And it's made to turn insights into action. So it's specifically made to be used for consumer insights and consumer intelligence and to push those towards true business impact. I'm not gonna go into detail on how it works, but we can say that it's like a Pinterest-like environment where projects are stored on walls, and on those walls, the pieces of information, the insights, the ideas, later on also the concepts, for example, are stored on those walls, and we call them tiles. But technology is not the only thing we need. I think if we want to make it happen, if we really want to move towards true digital collaboration, we not only need to add a piece of software, we also need to change the ways we work and the ways we think. And probably that's even more important. And I'm going to talk about that with Philip de Boek. Philip is our innovation expert, and he is one of the people who is half of his time almost in workshops. So he knows a lot about workshopping in physical environments. And I really want to know how he is dealing with the situation and how we are turning workshops into virtual experiences. I'm going to talk with Philip about 5 use cases of true digital collaboration, and we're going to talk about different aspects of workshopping, virtual workshopping. First, we are going to talk about a debrief, so sharing research results. Then we're going to talk about the first phase of a lot of projects, which is connecting the dots, understanding what you already know and what it is that you don't know yet. Then we dive into different phases of a workshop: ideation and co-creation, crafting and shaping, and then finally prioritizing and decision making. So first, sharing research results, organizing a debrief. One of those things that I find interesting when I do presentations offline is that a lot of the people, when you are about to share research results, are not really mentally ready for your message. They come into the meeting unprepared, not always knowing what the meeting will be about. Maybe they're under time pressure, maybe they're with their heads still in the previous meeting or already in the next one. So in order to make them more engaged from the start, one of the things that we can do is do some pre-engagement work. And one of the options that I really like here is having a short quiz up front. A short quiz about the research results they are about to see. So 10 questions, for example, and 10 answers, of course, they need to give. And they almost need to not guess, but they need to use their empathy, their consumer understanding and knowledge to almost predict what consumers will have said. And at the end of such an exercise, they get a score on 10 points. And of course, we try to make the questions in a certain way so that people score between a 4 and a 6 out of 10. That makes that they are not totally depressed about maybe their lack of knowledge about consumers and customers, but they also feel a little bit uncomfortable. They feel like the meeting will be interesting and we have sparked their curiosity. So this is a nice technique to make sure that people walk in really engaged and that they are there with their full attention. And now, Philip, I would really like to know from you,
Have you tried similar things before, and how have they worked?
Yeah, I would like to actually share an example of, let's say, a situation where you are debriefing or sharing the results of a more ethnographic study or more qualitative study. And this is a case of Unilever, which we did already a while ago, but I think the principles very much still apply within this context of result sharing. So this was a project for the food sustainability team of Unilever, and it was on food waste. And so they actually wanted to understand from consumers, how do they deal with food waste? How do they manage, let's say, the food in their fridge? We already kind of assumed and knew that upfront that, let's say, how the people in the team at Unilever were dealing with food waste was probably going to be different than, let's say, the regular housewife in the Midwest. So what in order to anticipate that, we already did something, let's say, before the workshop, and we not only did the research with consumers, we also asked some of the employees to do exactly the same, and also to take a picture of their fridge, to talk about the food that is in there, the leftovers that are in there, how they deal with them. And then we actually brought that together and we combined that in the debrief, to actually hold up a mirror in front of the people in the workshop and to say, look, there is a big difference, or there is a gap between you and your consumer. And the big insight, by the way, from this project was that if you think of, let's say, the Unilever employee fridge, which is the one here depicted on the left, those people deal much more rationally with food and food leftovers and food waste than, let's say, a typical consumer, a typical target consumer. And one of the things that we heard is that consumer says, look, when I sometimes I put leftovers in my fridge that I know I will never eat or consume again, but I actually feel better throwing them away when they're expired than when they're still actually fit for consumption. So that's actually very emotional kind of insight that was generated from the study that did not exist really, let's say, within the Unilever employees within that food sustainability team. So I would say it's a very playful, almost gamified way of, let's say, bringing, let's say, consumer research to life, and also, let's say, holding up a mirror for the people in the debrief. So this is then, let's say, something that you do before a workshop. Another thing that I would like to share is we use Poll Everywhere. It's a plugin that you can use in PowerPoint. It just requires people to have, let's say, a Wi-Fi connection or data connection, and you can actually what we call pimp your, let's say, workshop in terms of, or your debrief in terms of interactivity. Because what you can do is launch a poll or a question, and actually people vote or answer real time, and you see the results in represented in a graph. But also, interestingly, you can also work with word clouds. If you want to do more like an in the moment brainstorming session, it is also good to generate more qualitative data in a word cloud representation. Again, something that we actually already are using in offline workshops and offline debriefs, but now in an online debrief, this is really what you have to rely on to create a bit more interactivity in your sessions.
Yeah, so we pre-engage, we have different options there. Also during the session, we make it more interactive, especially when it's a virtual session. It's all about making it interactive to keep the attention of people. And I think we could even say that we could give a post task as well. If there is still something that we want people to do, that would be also possible. I think we leverage here, and it's a nice example of asynchronous and synchronous, and how we combine those two aspects, and how we can chunk the debrief into different aspects, pre, during, and post. Really interesting. The next use case we will talk about is connecting the dots, and that's that moment that you take before you start a new project, because you want an overview of the things that you already know and that you don't know yet. So you want to make sure that when you start a new project, it's of course more to the point. It will solve that knowledge gap. And of course, you want to avoid that you research things that you actually already researched and understood before. The example that I want to use here is one from Dorel, and Dorel is the company behind Maxi-Cosi and Queenie. So it's about strollers and car seats for babies and young kids. And for them, we did a project where for each of the different categories they are active in, we wanted to understand what the collective knowledge and wisdom was. So we wanted to understand what is everything we know around a specific category in a specific country. So we asked the people working within the category in the different countries to upload, let's say, all the ins and outs they had about the category, from documents that were on the server, documents that were on their personal laptops, and of course also the knowledge that was just in their heads. And they had to create on different walls different tiles containing that information. So it's not just uploading the documents, it's really uploading the meaningful observations, the insights, the pieces of information that in the future can still be relevant. And I think this is a nice example of one of the characteristics of digital collaboration, meaning archive and curate. And of course, you make use of the collective wisdom of the crowd to do that, to create that overview of what do we know already and what is it that we don't know yet. An ideal starting point, I think, of a lot of the projects that we do. And then we dive into use case number 3, and then we come onto one of the most important aspects, I think, of every workshop, which is the brainstorming part, where we are going to come up with new ideas and where we are truly going to co-create among employees. Philip, this is the moment where we believe that creativity is so important, and in offline sessions, in offline workshops, we have all kinds of creative techniques. Is that really possible to have the same kind of dynamics, to use the same kind of techniques in a virtual setting? I'm wondering if that's possible. I think our audience as well.
Yes, very good question. And I have a lot of opinions on that, because it is indeed one of those very crucial moments in the, let's say, in any creative process, is the brainstorming moment, the ideation moment. And because of the deprivation of this offline setting where you're in a room and you have the post-its and you have inspiration on the wall and your typical creative techniques, we had to reinvent ourselves. There is a couple of dimensions that we are now forced into. And one is on the creativity and how you trigger creativity. There is a lot already written on creativity. Do you have better creativity in groups? Do you have better creativity in large groups, small groups, individual? And a typical consensus until today, I would say, is that most of the time a group setting is the most conducive for creativity. That's also what we do a lot in the offline workshops, and we are with a suite count of people, which is between 10 and 20, and then we actually trigger that creativity. Although there is already, let's say, scholars out there like Lee Thompson from Calc University. She's a professor that she actually states that creativity works best individually, and that is also something that we now are gonna assume for more digital workshopping, because everyone is in their home, everyone is pretty much individual in their own, let's say, physical space. So we actually now adhere more to that theory, and it has actually worked out very well, which I will show later. So in our digital ideation workshop, we follow the thinking of Lee Thompson, and actually we have designed a process that leverages the individual creative ability to drive a better collective outcome. It's not so that we are never gonna share things back with the group. We're never gonna bring things back on a group level, but the starting point will be individual creative exercises. So that is one important element of the digital, let's say, ideation workshop. Another one is that we remove time pressure. When you think of the offline workshop, it's very expensive time because you flew over everyone from all over the world or from all over the country to this one physical space, so you don't have an unlimited amount of time. When we go digital, we actually have the luxury of time, and that actually fits with more and more theories that claim that you actually are more creative when there is no or less time pressure. So this is something that we really leverage, and what we do is we give a week for this ideation phase, and we actually take it away from the workshop and we make this a whole pre-phase, and we do the ideation over a period of a week. And why not 2 weeks, 3 weeks? And so we are really kind of very free now in terms of how long we're gonna leave for specific phases in the process. And then what it does require, and that is not different than offline workshops, is that you need the right creative stimulus. And that is where we believe in the power of crowdsourcing. We have our ICA community with creatives all over the world, and you actually can outsource, or let's say combine the creative power of the people within your organization with, let's say, what we call the 1%ers. And those are the people that have a creative mindset. They are either trained or they are, let's say, aspirational designers or creatives that are in this community. So we actually embrace them in our group, and we allow them to also create ideas for our challenge. And you see an example, and you will see some quotes of a project that actually finished only 2 weeks ago. It was a 3-day virtual workshop for Mars Food, where the challenge was to fill the 2022, let's say, pipeline and beyond. And that is, they really loved, let's say, the using ICA as a creative stimulus. And then how does this all come together is we have, let's say, the studio, and this is where enter the studio, the tool and the platform that Tom described earlier on in the session. So this is where we do a couple of things. We post the ideas of ICA, and it also allows us to post ideas that are lying around in drawers that have been generated in other front-end innovation projects that are now merely a PowerPoint deck or pictures of, let's say, post-its that have been generated in the past. So this becomes your archive of, let's say, creative stimulus and creative inspiration that you go into the workshop with. And so in this case, we posted 100 ideas from the ICA community. There was also, I think, 50 ideas that were already uploaded from Mars internally. And then we actually broaden up. We also are not, again, limited to the people in the workshop. We actually opened it up to 100 people within the organization. And I think 3 out of 4 of them actually actively contributed with posting ideas of themselves. And so what you do is you create a much more collective exercise in a much broader group, but you still rely on the power of the individual, because it's them individually that will have to read through all the inspiration, browse through the inspiration, and add new ideas to the wall. And so this is this studio environment, which also becomes at the same time this wall, or this environment where you not only post the inspiration, but you also iterate the thinking, and you also put the ideas that came out of it, and later on also the concepts that were generated in the workshop. This was, to be honest, eye-opening for the client, and I would say it is one of the most powerful use cases of this studio in the times of COVID-19. I must say myself, we have used it in the past, but this is where typically, imagine where you are in a room, you have all these ideas plastered on the wall, and really to bring inspiration. You cannot do this anymore. So you have to reinvent yourself in, let's say, stimulating the creativity in a different way. So this is how we did it for the ideation workshop, Tom.
Nice, very nice, and I think it's a wonderful example of how you now have the possibility to involve more people and make use of their collective wisdom, and to have different moments with that larger group of people. I really like it. Next one, number 4, is crafting and shaping. That is the phase where we are building further on the ideas, where we are going to make the ideas better together. So this is the moment where we are literally all in one room, and we are really working. We are really writing, we are adding post-its, we are discussing. I can imagine, Philip, that this is also a hard one to take to a virtual environment. It's maybe even harder than the creative part, because for the creative part, we can find very interesting solutions. How do we do that? The kind of building on each other, the really making things better together part. Can we also do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I have to agree that this is where synchronous and working together is very important. And we build in still in the workshop sometimes of synchronicity. The key challenge that we had here, or the key objective, is to iterate and actually build on consecutive learning. And that is what this concept and idea and concept writing and crafting is all about. It is taking it to the next level, taking it to the next iteration, getting feedback, improving it, rewriting it. And actually how we do it in traditional workshops is you go in 2 days from, let's say, rough ideas, rough diamonds, to fully executed concepts, even including sketches or product visualizations. And so that is the challenge. It is that feedback. There is 2 ways how we deal with it. There is the sprints that we do, let's say, during the day, where we ask people to commit time every, let's say, a couple of hours during that specific day to really work together in mini groups to create, let's say, concepts, draft concepts and final concepts. How we do it during the day is within mini groups, everyone still writes by themselves. It's still an individual exercise, and you actually don't want to be bothered by anyone when you're copywriting and writing your concept. But then in iterations of 15 minutes or 30 minutes, you share that back with your mini group, you get feedback, you go back to the drawing board, and then you iterate your concept. So by doing this, you can turn around quite a lot of a high volume of ideas and concepts in a limited amount of time, depending on how many people you have in that workshop. So Tom, indeed, this is where you are requesting, let's say, dedicated time and synchronous, let's say, time online with people. But again, this is easy to do within Teams or in any other, let's say, digital communication platform. What is the big advantage of let's say doing it over multiple days is that we have the night, and we call it the overnight. Is a word that we use a lot. You will see it also coming back later. Is that overnight you also can ask for feedback from consumers. You can ask from feedback from colleagues that are not even part of this workshop initiative. And so think back of the studio that I shared. Although in the workshop we were only with 15 people during that day, we actually presented the output of that day to the broader group, the 75, 100 people on our studio platform. So overnight people could comment, could actually share feedback on how to optimize the concepts. The next day we come back, not only do, let's say, the workshoppers, the limited group of people that are writing the concepts, don't only wake up with a fresh mind, but also with a lot of, let's say, feedback and cues for optimizing the concepts, as I said, from consumers and from colleagues that are not part of the workshop. This also allows that you only bring those people into that part of the workshop, which is hard work. It's actually producing, let's say, concepts and content and copywriting, is that you only invite those people that you feel have a passion for it and the skill to do it. While in a typical offline workshop setting, the people that you start with on day 1 as the people that you will have on board for the whole period of the workshop, whether it's 2 or 3 or even more days. Now, this really allows you to bring in the people with the right skill at the right time for the right task. And especially here, this is important.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that you can make use of consecutive and iterative learning, because you're not forced anymore to do it in a couple of days. You can take way more time, and you really give people the time to think. And I also like the aspect that you mentioned, that in different phases of the crafting and shaping, you can involve different people with different skills. That's also, of course, a nice one. And you already made the bridge towards the last phase or the last use case, which is prioritizing and decision making. This is really once we have like final concepts, or when we have like things that are ready to vote on and to be evaluated. It's typically the moment where people walk around with little stickers, and where we can vote, and where we can put those stickers on different ideas, different concepts, and so on. What is the virtual alternative for this particular phase? And I think you already mentioned something like overnight screening and stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, Tom, and I think we saved a little bit the best or the most challenging for last, because this is the time where people align. This is the time where people discuss among each other. You can argue why a certain concept should be prioritized or why not. And I must say, in the many years of the workshopping that I have done, I have two what I would call meta observations of these stickering exercises. And I think we have all been in a situation where it came to the stickering, and where everyone gets 3 or 4 or whatever number of stickers, and you post it on the ideas or concepts that you feel we should proceed with into the next stage. Now, the two observations that I have is, the first sticker attracts more. And so there is this almost like group dynamic of, oh, there is a sticker, so probably someone likes it, so I should like it too. And the idea that the boss put a sticker on actually gets the most stickers in the end. So that is the dynamic that we see over and over again. So within this, we could think of, oh, let's do a digital stickering exercise. As at Insights Consulting, we said, why don't we try to, let's say, circumvent the stickering all in all. So that is, for us, it was a great opportunity to leave behind this part of stickering and prioritizing just based on a very simple opinion. And we actually use the digital setup here as a benefit instead of a handicap. Since we don't have that group dynamic and the non-verbal, let's say, ability to come to an agreement in a group, we had to reinvent ourselves. And how did we do that? It's actually to become much more data-driven. Since we don't have a lot of time to discuss, and because that is, we know in Teams environments, it is not a good discussion. It's a good presentation and meeting environment, but it's really not to have discussions with a broad group. It's not the ideal platform. Is we bring, let's say, more of the feedback in overnight. More data are generated, and typically, some of our clients, most of our clients use something in the form of a DVF assessment. Desirability is actually, do consumers like it? Viability, is there a business, let's say, potential for this? Is there a demand with our customers or in the market? And then there is, let's say, and it should be feasibility instead of desirability at the bottom, but that is actually the technical feasibility. So that is where R&D comes in. So what we have designed is a process where overnight, and again, so after the workshop, we remain with 20 or 40 concepts, and we need to narrow that down before the next day to half of that, for example. I'm just giving some hypothetical examples. Instead of stickering to get to the top 10, we actually measure the consumer desirability through a survey. So we actually ask consumers overnight via a simple survey, which of these do you like most? And we do the same with experts. So we bring in experts from inside of the organization to assess these ideas on viability and feasibility as well. So this don't have to be the people that were in the workshop itself. Ideally, actually, they have a fresh perspective and they come in as experts, let's say, in a new time slot. And then you come in the next morning with a much more objective and a much more data-driven discussion, rather than a subjective discussion that is actually dominated by the more senior people in the room. So this is a great way to avoid the stickering exercises and to come with a much more substantial, let's say, data-driven discussion on defining priorities.
I really like it because it makes it way more objective. I can see indeed why the stickering exercise can become very subjective. So bringing in the data-driven approach to do the curation and to move towards decision making is really a nice one. And Philip, if I listen to all your examples in each of the different use cases, it makes me think of the word for crisis in Chinese, because we are in a crisis. We are in times of crisis. We are forced to go online. But in Chinese, the word crisis exists out of two characters, where the first one is actually signifying danger, and the second one, opportunity. And I have the feeling when I listen to you that although we were forced to go online, to take workshops and brainstorm sessions to a virtual environment, it also holds a lot of opportunities, and there are a lot of things that maybe we want to keep. A lot of things we already used from time to time in physical sessions, but now we discovered a lot of additional kind of advantages of virtual collaboration, of having more people, of having more time with those people, and so on. And definitely, I think when we look at the cost of physical workshopping, which is huge. Let's be honest about that. We use a lot of time, which costs money, of course. We fly in people from all around the world. Sometimes I think the travel costs are higher than the cost actually of doing the workshop. So I can see that is something now that we have seen that it can work online, that we will think twice about. Is it really necessary to do it in a physical environment? Is it really worth it to make all those offers from, let's say, a time and cost perspective? But are there other things? Because this is an obvious one. Are there other things, Philip, you believe that will not come back, that we will never do again, now that we have seen all the kind of opportunities that there could be, and how we can use and leverage digital technology? What will you never do again? That's my question.
Well, first, never say never, right? But I think the three key outtakes and the key learnings from digitizing this whole, let's say, workshopping experience, and I'm focusing now especially on the whole typical 3-day innovation workshop that we all know. I would never go back to the same 3-day format. And I think what we have seen is making it asynchronous, spreading it over time, and by really leveraging the studio and digital platforms to do much more pre-work and ideation upfront is something that I would probably never recommend to go back to. Also, and that is a trap that we actually fell into in our workshop. We still did a 3-day effort where we asked for most of the people to be there for those 3 days consecutively. It would have been so much more simple to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday instead of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, which would have given us, and we already turned around a lot of overnight consumer testing and overnight feedback, but it would have just given us more time to digest that information, to get maybe better and more data overnight. And just having Monday, Wednesday, Friday also gives people in the organization, let's say, those in-between days to just catch up with work. They are not taken out or ripped out of their, let's say, day-to-day for 3 consecutive days, and you spread it a little bit. So I think spreading the effort is really something that we should do, knowing that we have, let's say, the digital tools to do that. I would still probably do more of the alignment in person, maybe some of the even the crafting and the shaping. So I think there will still be some physical component to it, but only with the right people. And that is actually the second point, is you can use the right people for the right task. We have to let go of this assumption that the 3-day workshop, and I know it's all about the energy and bonding, that is right, and it's something that you're deprived of in this setting, but it also allows you to say who really needs to be here for this specific task. And you also saw that, let's say, the global CMO came in for 2 times 30 minutes over those 3 days time. And you don't need to, it doesn't require that person to be there or to travel to the physical destination. So it's really only using the experts when they're needed, only using the people that have a passion or a skill for writing concepts in that specific phase, instead of trying to normalize everyone in that group to do all the same things over the course of 3 days. And the last one, I think a very important one, it's something that we already do also in offline workshops, is this bringing the consumer and other voices into the room or into the virtual room, right? Because you tend to be really, let's say, within your group, and you create this almost microcosmos in an offline setting where you're almost locking out a lot of outside opinions and outside influences. Here we actually force and embrace consumer opinions overnight. We actually bring experts in at the right time and so on. So this is really kind of removing the subjective judgment and getting more objective data into the process. And then I want to end with let's say 2 quotes of let's say 2 people that were involved in our let's say innovation workshop 2 weeks ago for Mars. This is let's say our partner in crime. This is Laura. This is our CMI contact person that was actually setting up the initiative and managing the initiative with us. And what you see there is achieve more impact for half the price. And they actually did a calculation of how much cheaper it was and how much costs they saved by doing this in a virtual setting. But she says we reached so many more people, we had much more impact and even more discipline in the workshop than we would have had in an offline setting. So this is the opinion of, let's say, the person who put her head on the chopping block for this workshop. And then the next one is more, let's say, from a participant experience. And this is Max. He's the global brand acceleration manager for Uncle Ben's. He says, "Oh, we created so much more alignment with the markets." Again, this was a possibility that we had, taking into account some time zone differences, but to have much more markets also into the discussion and to create alignment with markets, because from a cost perspective or a feasibility or a time perspective, it was not always possible in an offline setting to fly over your MDs of your key markets. And he talks about a momentum, and he also recognizes this this process. And for them, for Mars, it actually went from a 5 days in-person initiative to a 3 days virtual. He calls it a 3-day because that is what he sees, but he also recognizes that the whole pre-phase with the studio and the ideation and the ICA is also, of course, a part that we took out of that. And so we actually focused the 3 days more on shaping, crafting, and alignment exercise. And he thought the process went very smoothly. Yeah? So that is also something that we need to take into account. Not only do we achieve the right impact, but also how does it feel as an for the people in that workshop. And also here, we were happy and satisfied to see this type of response from the participants.
Really interesting, Philip. I think it's clear workshopping 2.0 is born, and in the future, workshops will probably look different than they were before all of this started. So I'm wondering if our audience has any questions, any comments, any remarks. So I would like to give back the word to Kaya for the Q&A round.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Philip, for sharing these learnings and these examples. We will welcome any questions. So I'm now asking the audience, if you have any questions, please type them in the question pane. We do already have a couple of questions. I think a first one for Philip, when we're looking at the ideation phase, we received a question, if you have a longer time frame allowed for ideation, what guidance would you give for blocking interruptions? Because of course, now we're in a setting where we're not locked up, you could say, in a room, in an offline environment, but people are behind, well, in the comfort of their own homes, but also behind their own desktops. How can we block interruptions in those settings?
It is, I would say it is going to be much more organic, right? I think by giving time and making it also an engaging exercise, and those people don't see that as, oh my God, it's a chore that I need to do. But I think it is, find your time, find your sweet spot. It's also accessible on a mobile phone, so maybe you do it in the evening while you're walking and sitting on a bench, if that is still allowed in your country in these times. But this is about create your own time and your own space to do this pre-tasks and this ideation session. If that is what the question was about, right? It is about how do we make sure that they can dedicate the time and block interruptions.
Yes,
it's all
exactly.
about asynchronicity. Maybe it's something that you also decide to do 10 minutes a day, or you say, no, I'm going to dedicate 1 hour or 2 hours, because in total we measured that, and in total people spend around 2 to 3 hours in total on this pre-task in the ideation, which is a lot of time. If you think about it, that is a long time, and that from 70 people, it's a huge amount of attention span that you get from people, just as long as you keep it interesting. And especially the ICA ideas are just they are also helping people to think out of the box, and there are ideas there that they probably never have thought of. So it is also just keep it engaging and allow them the time to do it. Again, we also moderate these ideation tasks, and we also ask people who haven't logged in, please log in, or who haven't posted anything. And so it's also about individual follow-up with everyone.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe another question around also for you, Philip, mentioning the concept of overnight screening in the prioritization phase, where you involve indeed the consumer voice overnight. How does that exactly work?
Yeah, and we use now overnight because that's what we do also in offline workshops often. So we do overnight screening with consumers. Now we still kept it overnight, but I think it's not necessary. We can also choose to stagger that a little bit more, give a bit more time. But for the sake of the discussion, let's call it overnight. It's all about short time pressure. And what you need to have is a group of consumers that are readily available and that are actually expecting this. Because also take into account that in this exercise, we needed overnight feedback from UK, US, and Australia. So the 3 key markets that they had chosen. So if you end your workshop at 6 p.m. and you still need to prepare, let's say, the stimulus, there is a time frame of, let's say, 8 to 10 p.m. In the UK at that point, because we end at 6 p.m. UK time. You have maybe 2 hours in the UK to get all those responses in. So you need to have those people available. And we actually use our squares. Our communities are a very handy, let's say, tool and capability to be able to do that. And because those people probably were even already engaged in a pre-phase when we did ethnography or when we did some let's say, insight generation. So those people are excited to see the ideas coming in and to then rate them. But again, we are putting ourselves a lot under pressure because we do not only do surveys, we also even capture qualitative feedback overnight. And that can be through video surveying, meaning that people give their qualitative feedback through their webcam, or verbatims written, and they are even analyzed, let's say, and structured before we go into the next day's session. So on the back end, in the back office, for us, it's a huge logistical challenge, but we're able to manage that. But to release some pressure on our side and to make that input even better, we would actually go for, let's say, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or even a Monday and then the next Monday and then the Monday after, and to really spread it a bit more so you get more time to capture that feedback in between.
You also talked about ICA and the creative crowdsourcing. There came a question referring also to the Mars project. How long does it take, and how long did it take to get the ideas from ICA in this whole flow?
Typically, so first, what is very important when you do an ICA challenge, and we will come to that in our next webinar in detail, but just to already give a little bit of more information, you need a very good creative brief. There is a business challenge that you have that is not something that you can just put on the ICA community as a challenge. You need to translate that into something that these creatives know how to work with, and still to create something that is on brief. So there is a little bit of time that we need with the client to fine tune that creative brief, and then we give them a week to 2 weeks. So let's say the sweet spot is around 10 days, which is enough time pressure, but not too much, because some people, again, don't have the time to do it. So they choose their own moment. But within 2 weeks, we created around 100 ideas with ICA.
Okay. And as you mentioned also, we will have a session next week tapping into creative collaboration. It's all about the whole ideation phase and how to be creative, and also very much in line with today's reality, agile decision making and exploring creative solutions for the changing environment and changing consumer needs and frictions. So I would welcome everyone to join that session, where we'll deep dive on some of the insights from our own COVID consumer community, fresh insights from there, and how we use the creative collaboration tools and our ICA network to get new solutions and creative outputs for brands. If you have any questions for now, I would like also to, you can still post them here, but you can also contact Philip and Tom. Their contact details are on the next slides. I would thank you all for joining us here today. Don't hesitate to get in touch, and thank you again for tuning in.